throughout the 6,000-year history of human civilization. In order to punish criminals, both East and West have seen all sorts of grotesque and inhumane punishments. Today, we will review 10 real tortures that have existed throughout human history. Especially the last one can be said to be extremely cruel. Number 10. Burning the brazen bull. This was a cruel form of punishment invented by the ancient Greek coppersmith, Perillos. It was a brutal method of execution. They would place the condemned inside a bronze bull. Then, a fire would be lit beneath the bull, roasting it from the outside. Because bronze is an excellent conductor of heat, the victim inside would suffer excruciating pain from the intense heat. Watching myself being roasted alive. Inside the brazen bull, there was a sound pipe installed. As the criminal let out desperate screams, the pipe would transform the prisoner's voice into the bellows of a bull. Ironically, the first person to be subjected to the brazen bull torture was the very inventor of this instrument of punishment. Number 9. The Iron Maiden. This form of punishment originated in the 16th century. It's a cylindrical device shaped like a human. The inside is covered with long nails. The bottom is a removable wooden panel. During execution, the device would be raised about 1 meter off the ground. Then the prisoner would be locked inside. The moment the door closes, long spikes will pierce the victim's body. Then, the bottom panel is removed, and under the force of gravity, the victim will slowly slide down. But because of the spikes, the victim won't fall immediately, but will instead suffer the agony of their flesh being torn apart. Eventually, they were slowly tortured to death. However, due to the lack of relevant records in historical books, it is difficult to judge whether this torture device is a legend or actually existed. Number 8. Lynching. This is one of the most cruel punishments in human history, also known as death by 1,000 cuts. During the execution, the criminal would be bound to a pillar. Then, their limbs would be broken, their vocal cords would be severed to prevent struggling and screaming. Finally, the executioner, wielding a sharp blade, would cut the flesh from the condemned person's body, piece by piece. And during this process, the condemned person would often endure hours of agony, watching helplessly as their own flesh was slowly removed. Ultimately, they died in agony. Number 7. The laughter torture. This was a torture method invented by 17th century Europeans. First, the criminal was tightly bound to a chair. The criminal's soles were then coated with honey or sugar. Then, a goat was brought in to lick the criminal's soles. Because a goat's tongue has barbs, the licking caused unbearable itching. After the goat has licked it clean, the executioner will immediately use the same method to stimulate the goat to lick continuously. This way, the criminal will laugh uncontrollably due to unbearable itching, eventually dying from oxygen deprivation in the lungs due to prolonged laughter. Number 6. The dripping torture. This punishment can truly be described as worse than death. First, the prisoner will be bound to a chair. Above his head will be a bucket filled with water. There will be a small hole in the bottom of the bucket. Water will drip constantly onto the prisoner's forehead. Because the dripping speed is controlled, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, the prisoner's mind will remain constantly tense. And this process usually lasts for several weeks. During this time, the prisoner's anxiety and unease will steadily intensify, ultimately leading to the complete collapse of the condemned spirit. It's a living hell. If you find the above punishments insufficiently cruel, then the following punishments will definitely make your hair stand on end. Throughout the history of human civilization, various kinds of cruel punishments have existed. Each one was extremely cruel. You must watch until the very end. Number 5. Execution by elephant. This punishment was extremely popular in medieval Europe. Specially trained elephants acted like executioners. During the execution, the criminal would be bound to the ground. Then, an elephant would be made to trample them to death with its feet. The elephant would also follow the executioner's instructions to attack different parts of the prisoner's body. The elephant would also use its tusks to toss the criminal around for sport. Finally, it would crush the prisoner's head like a watermelon. Because this punishment was too cruel, it was abolished globally in the late 19th century. This punishment has been abolished. Number 4. The camel hat punishment. This punishment was a perverse method used in ancient Europe to subdue slaves. Buyers would shave the heads of their purchased slaves, completely bald. and take them to the desert to be bound to stakes, leaving their heads off the ground. Then, a piece of hot camel skin was peeled off. It was directly placed on the slave's head. They were left to bake in the 40-degree desert for 3 days. As the high temperature continued to bake, the camel skin began to shrink rapidly. Like a plaster, it adhered tightly to the scalp. It was unbearable. Even more terrifying was, because the newly grown hair of the slaves cannot penetrate the camel hide, it grows backward and re-enters the scalp. It feels like tens of thousands of insects, constantly wriggling. Most slaves die completely after 3 days of this torment. Those who survive, they would also be tortured beyond recognition. They would be as obedient as animals to their masters. Number 3. The breaking wheel. This punishment originated in Greece. It was mainly used to punish slaves. It was a wooden rectangular wheel torture device. Before the execution began, the prisoner's hands and feet would be tied separately. The victim's limbs are bound to wheels at either end. Then, the executioner slowly turns the gears. The victim's body is stretched out to the sides. Soon the prisoner's body will be dislocated. All the bones in their body will completely break. What's even more terrifying is, the victim will hear their own joints bursting apart. That feeling of despair, of being pulled apart, ordinary people simply couldn't withstand it. Number 2. Bamboo torture. This punishment can be described as extremely cruel. During the execution, the prisoner would be bound and placed on bamboo shoots just beginning to sprout. Because bamboo grows rapidly, it wouldn't take long before the prisoner's body would be pierced by the bamboo. During this process, the criminal could only endure the piercing pain, finally dying from excessive blood loss, becoming nourishment for the bamboo. Number 1. Rat torture. This is one of the most brutal forms of punishment in human history. Generally, the executioner would place an iron bucket over the criminal's body, then release several rats, starved for days, inside the bucket. Then, place the burning charcoal above the iron barrel. The rat, unable to bear the high temperature inside the barrel, will become restless. But the tightly sealed iron barrel leaves the rat nowhere to escape. Finally, it can only use its sharp claws to rip open the prisoner's belly. Stimulated by the blood, the rat will gnaw on the prisoner's organs. The executioner will also place charcoal inside the prisoner's belly to let the dying prisoner completely expire. However, each method of punishment is a hallmark of evil humanity. Rather than saying the punishment is cruel, it's better to say that humans are cruel. After watching, do you feel fortunate to live in such a happy world?